Bring our friend Misty Marris in on all of this. She's here with me in New York as we watch the president speak. So he can't speak because of the gag order about witnesses. But we, had Michael Cohen today on the stand. And as Geraldo and I were talking about a few minutes ago, there was this phone call that, a lot of people said was at the heart of the case where Cohen supposedly called up Trump and told him, I took care of the Stormy Daniels thing. And now with text messages in the call log, we know he was talking to Trump's bodyguard, Keith Schiller. And it's hard to believe he would have been talking about Stormy Daniels because all the texts are about something else. I mean, what do you make of how important today was?
Yeah, and today was incredibly important. And that call is really central to this whole thing. And part of that is because this was on direct examination. When you get the softball questions, Michael Cohen says, I had this call with Schiller. Trump was on speakerphone. We talked about Stormy Daniels. I said the deal is done. And there was a lot of specific memory about that call. Well, now on cross-examination, a little pretext to that. What was spoken about before? A 14-year-old harassing Michael Cohen and a conversation relating to that with Schiller. So doubt is cast on the entire content of that phone call. Connell, I'm surprised that prosecutors, knowing that those messages existed, didn't really get ahead of that, because now it just seems like it's so outrageously not credible that Michael Cohen was talking about Stormy Daniels, has this perfectly clear memory, but it's completely eradicated by this pre-conversation that he had with Schiller. And that really is a central component of the case, that call specifically.
We had a debate between two lawyers last hour about whether they simply missed it on the prosecution or they didn't want to bring it up. To your point, they didn't get out ahead of it. I mean, which side would you take? Do you think they just missed this?
No, I don't think they missed it. I think they're likely prepared to deal with it. And maybe on redirect, you'll hear them say something like, what was the question I asked? The question I asked was specific, relating to a discussion about Stormy Daniels, and maybe try and get around it that way. I don't really know why they didn't get out ahead on that point, because they actually took great pains to get ahead of a lot of Michael Cohen's credibility issues, bringing out many, many inconsistencies, many admitted lies, but left that out. And I do think that could have been, a real tactical error. And I don't mean to be, the Monday morning quarterback and say you coulda, shoulda, woulda. But to me, if you're sitting there in the jury box and you already have somebody with credibility issues, now you've got an issue that's not really so poo-poo, something that isn't really a big deal. You've got something that's really, really central to tying Trump to the case.
The question is whether or not it's a fatal flaw in the prosecution's case. I mean, do you think it is?
Actually, I think that the prosecution with Michael Cohen, it's going to come down to the jury, because the jury is the one who's going to weigh the evidence. They're going to make a determination about the credibility of each witness. If the jury decides that one thing Michael Cohen said was false, that he lied, they can choose to actually disregard all of his testimony, or they can say, we believe this but not that. This is the risk you take with any witness like Michael Cohen. The risk is that you're asking the jury to parse through what's true and what's false. And that's always a risky business.
Because it doesn't necessarily mean, just because this phone call was with Keith Schiller about something else, clearly, and that's what the texts were about, that the other issues didn't come up, for example. We see it in some of the testimony with the way Blanche asked him about it. You just said you didn't recall that phone call, and then you testified previously that you remembered the phone call. That's the problem. It was on the record in his direct testimony that he remembered the phone call with Trump. Now he says, I don't remember a phone call from years ago. But I guess it's still possible that either he, as he will say, as he already has and will say, that he did talk to Trump. Hard to believe in just 90 seconds because he was texting Schiller about the other issue right afterwards. So it's possible that he did talk to Trump. But if he didn't, does it take apart the whole case, or could we still have falsification of business records and all the rest, even if this phone call that particular day was about something else?
Even if the phone call was about something else, it doesn't mean the whole thing falls apart. What falls apart is that you have to believe Michael Cohen in order for the case to exist, because he's the one that ties everything together and ties Trump in any way to the actual business records and transactions that are at the root of this case.
Okay, so now what? What do you do next if you're the defense? I thought it was interesting. Laura Ingalls said this in her reporting just before they broke for the day. They're going to call a witness, I guess an expert on campaign finance, the defense, which I don't know if I was surprised, but we were speaking on the show, I guess it was yesterday, about whether or not they would call any witnesses at all, and I guess they're going to.
So I wouldn't want to call any witnesses relating to the substance of this case, because I think that defense defense has what they need on the record from the prosecution. Remember, prosecution has the burden of proof. But an election law expert, that is key. There is a test that's used in federal election law to make any sort of election contribution, to make it such that it needs to be reported that it would be a violation of campaign finance law. And Connell, a lot of people don't talk about this. It's called the irrespective test. If the obligation were to exist, irrespective of the election, and I'm not talking about someone's intent, was it about Melania, was it about his reputation, was it about the election? It's the nature of the actual obligation. So in this case, it's a hush money NDA. Most of the time, that's not going to qualify. So that's why you have an election law expert coming out and talking about what actually makes something a personal expense versus something in furtherance of the election. And if you get a couple of those jurors, two of whom are lawyers, to say, I'm a little skeptical that this would have ever been a crime regardless of what Michael Cohen says, well, then you've got your hung jury, which in this case is likely the goal of the defense at acquittals. Pretty unrealistic, I think, but a hung jury? I think that's really, really realistic at this point.
Because then you only need one. Maybe it's one of those lawyers.
Only need one.
You only need one. So maybe that witness is the only one we'll hear. Did you think on the defense side, and then they kind of rest and we're into closing arguments?
I do. So I think Trump's attorneys had still left the door a crack open to say he might testify. I said this right from the beginning. I don't think he will. I don't think it would serve him. A lot of what's on the record, keep in mind, Michael Cohen, even if you believe him, a lot of the transactions of what he's speaking about happened a bit at an arm's length. You've got Alan Weisselberg at the center of this. Michael Cohen said, oh, Trump told me to talk to Alan about how to structure this transaction, to call it a retainer. And then Alan told me to do X, Y, Z. You don't really have Trump central. He's a little bit more ancillary. So with that being said, you don't really want to dig in too much on that and give the prosecution the chance to rehabilitate by starting to put your own witnesses on. Focus on that one really technical legal issue, and I think that's what you're going to see the defense do. We're going to get into the technical legality of this. And Connell, I've said it to you before.
Yep.
This case lives and dies on the jury instructions. What do they say?
That is, a lot of people keep saying that. How does Mershon put it to the jury? And how he phrases it is going to be very important. Thank you, Misty. Quick break here, News Nation.